97% of people who start writing a novel never make it to the end. Only 3% finish it. And I have been one of the 97% more than once. I have several novels resting in my drawer that never made it past the middle. I believe the reason why people abandon their first draft is not that they run out of ideas or they don't like the characters anymore or they just don't vibe with the story. I think the reason is a mindset reason. It really is the mindset that people believe when they first start writing a novel that it should already sound like a story, that it should be almost like a finished product, even though it's just the first step. People get discouraged when they notice when they're writing the first draft that it's chaotic, messy, or even in some places embarrassingly bad. Well, this is completely normal actually. But the 3% who finish the first draft are not the ones who manage to have a perfect first draft or are better writers. The thing is that they trust the void, how I like to call it. And the phrase trust the void sounds dramatic, I know, but what I mean by it is that writing something that doesn't exist yet is a process where you need to be comfortable with uncertainty. What I call the void is that creative space where your story hasn't formed yet, where it's still beginning to be put together by your subconscious, your creativity, your imagination, all of these parts that maybe we're not using all the time in our daily lives. So if I say trust the void, I mean you need to be able to live with this uncertainty that you don't know yet if the story works out perfectly, if the characters are how you imagine them, if everything comes together as you see it in your mind. Our brains like comfort and they like what we know, so being in this place of uncertainty can be challenging, and our brain usually tries to distract us and tell us like, oh, you need to do more world building, you should draft more, you should spend more time on fleshing out the characters. All of these things that are trying to hold you back, these are just messages that are trying to stop you and take you out of this uncomfortable process that all writers have to go through. Because in the end, there is a blank page when you start, and you're the one who fills it. You're the one who comes up with the story, and you are the one who's lifting it out of the void, creating it. And I just want to remind you, if you're in this process, that you will not be able to fill the void that is your story at this point by re-editing chapter number 1. You're just going to have to fill all those pages and fill in the story and trust the process at the moment. I think many of us get the wrong ideas from the books we love. If you pick up something like The Name of the Wind, for example, or any other book you really like, you are holding the end product of a very long process of drafting, rewriting, editing, professional edits. And all of this has come together to be this perfect end product that you hold in your hands. But you'll never see the first draft that probably bears literally no resemblance to what you are reading. So we sit down to write the first draft, and we compare it immediately to something like this that is the end result of several rounds of professional editing, and that is just not fair, and it's also not useful for us as writers. The first draft is much more like clay. It's not that you're trying to build a cathedral in one step. You start with the ground foundation. You're creating something that later can be shaped into something that is beautiful and pristine and all as epic as you imagine, but you don't expect that from the beginning. You start with the clay. And actually most novels are created in editing and not in writing the first draft. So how do you actually make it to the end of the first draft? First, and this may sound quite simple, but it really isn't in practice, is that you need to lower your expectations for this first draft. Allow yourself to write imperfectly. Really lay it out there without criticizing yourself while you're writing. Because when you try to write a first draft that is perfect, what you will end up doing is something like you will write and then you will go back to edit and you will rewrite and then you will think, oh, maybe I do need to shape this chapter differently, maybe I need to shape this character, and you get caught in a cycle of changing things and editing when you're actually in the creative process of writing, and that's a totally different energy. You have awakened your inner critic. And this can really stop you from getting into the flow and writing your story down as fast as possible, preferably in one flow so that you can later edit it and shape it into the epic story that really lives in your head. So the writers who manage to get to the end are usually the writers who can tolerate their own bad writing long enough so that they can get down their first draft and then later work on it. And this is a skill that you can actually learn. One way to learn it is to make it physically harder to actually edit while you're writing. And one way to do this is, of course, handwriting. I have started to write more of my first drafts by hand because it helps me to get into the story more easily. It is really harder to edit and rewrite when you have to cross out everything, and when you do it too often, the page just becomes unreadable. So you are restricted by the medium from editing. And this really helps to get into the flow. And while you're also writing a bit slower, because of your handwriting, I mean, I'm not such a fast handwriter, so it slows me down, and that helps me also collect my thoughts a bit more and think about things while I'm writing. And the whole story shapes differently in my mind when I do handwriting versus typing on the computer. But even if you prefer typing on the computer, there's some ways you can make it harder to edit. For example, you could use a really light font that is not very visible when you're typing, and some writers even use white font on white background, so there's really no way that they could edit. The whole purpose of this is to separate the writing process from the editing process, because these two have completely different energies. And when you write the first draft, you need the mindset of an explorer who is willing to see what's happening and going with the flow, not of a critic, of an editor who is looking for mistakes and trying to change things. This could actually really hold you back from finishing your first draft. And if you want to know more about handwriting and how to use this for your novel, I've made a whole video about that you can check out if you want to learn more. Now, I'm not saying that you should literally write your first draft blind. I used to be a complete pantser, and I used to get stuck so many times in the middle of a novel that was so frustrating, and I don't want you to go through that same thing. So you have a much better chance to finish your first draft if you write down at least the major plot points. You don't need to do a complete outline, a perfect outline. You don't need to map out every little scene, but it will help you if you have the beginning, the main plot twist, and the ending at least. And you also want to know how your characters transform throughout the whole story. Because maybe discovery writing could go well for you on a good day, and I love discovery writing, it's so much fun. But then a bad day comes, a bad week comes, maybe even a bad month, and I cannot really find back into the story. I don't have the energy. And then I really don't want to start plotting when I'm already in the writing process. That completely interrupts the flow that I've created until then. So I like to avoid this by making sure that I know at least the major plot points so I can always continue writing. And talking about hard times, when you really have a hard time, and this likely will happen throughout the time when you write a book, it takes a long time, what will carry you through these hard times is a writing community. I have several writing buddies, a writing group that meets weekly, and it really helps me. It has helped me in the past when I felt unmotivated and lost, because it helps to talk about the issues you have with your story. And also just people who show up regularly, they help you to show up regularly as well. And if you live in a place where you don't have a writing community, or maybe you don't know anybody else who's writing, you can also take this online. I have, for example, this little online game that I use to meet up with a writing buddy, and we just have this online space where we do writing sessions. We start a focus timer, and we just have our little avatars there sitting at a desk writing together while we are writing in real life. And this helps, really. It helps to see that another person is also focusing on the same thing as you are, and that they're showing up to do the work. And of course, writing a first draft is a very intense thing. It's a very intense process. And it helps me to set a certain time frame to it. I don't want this open type of work where it feels like, okay, this could take forever. No, I like to set myself a deadline, a time frame that's realistic for me, where I'm going to finish this first draft, because I want to be fast doing it. I want to get to the bones and to the meat of this story, and that will happen only in editing. So authors like Stephen King, for example, write a novel in 3 months, but he is a very experienced writer and it's his main job. So if you are not in the privileged position to have so much time for writing, you need to adjust this time frame so that it fits your life realistically. If you want to estimate how much time it would take you to finish your novel, you can do a little math in your mind. So let's say the typical fantasy story has 90 to 150,000 words. And you can decide what's your daily word count, and you can divide it and see how many days it would take you to write your novel. So let's do a little example. Let's say you write a novel that has a goal of 100,000 words, and you want to commit to writing 1,000 words a day, which is an ambitious goal, I would say, if you write every single day. So that would take you 3 months and 10 days to finish. Now that's enough math for me. But the bottom line is I want to finish this draft as fast as possible to really power through it. So get to what I consider the real work of writing, or the main work, which is editing, and that will realistically probably take you at least twice as long as writing the first draft. So here is what I want you to take away from this video. If you manage to be one of the 3% to finish the first draft, then you will be a different person. Your identity will change completely. When I managed to complete my first draft after several unsuccessful tries, I was so elated. I was I was so excited. I felt like for the first time I can actually call myself a writer, and I didn't feel like an imposter anymore saying that, because I had really managed to put in the work over years. Yes, it took me years. And I had managed to completely pull through this work that felt extremely hard, because it isn't easy to write a whole novel. And that's why so many people fail at it, because it is a very challenging thing and you are sitting there seemingly all by yourself and doing this whole work alone. If you're right now in the middle of writing your first draft and you feel like it's a complete disaster, chaotic, messy, whatnot, remind yourself that this is okay. This draft is allowed to be messy. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is not the final product. And your only job here is to finish this draft. Finish it. And if you've ever abandoned a draft like me, let me know in the comments what it was that actually made you trip and made you abandon it. I would really like to know that. And if you've stayed until the end of the video, I might as well introduce myself. I'm Effie. I'm a dark fantasy writer with a literature degree, and I write about and I make videos about the painful, beautiful, sometimes messy process of writing. And if it's something that resonates with you, I would love to have you here on the channel, and see you in the next video.